with John Carpay, the founder of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedom, a very unique organization, a constitutional lawyer fighting for our freedoms. Founded in 2010, won 30 cases so far, has another 15 active, cases we know of, famous cases, defending our freedoms related to the law. And his organization is national, and have lawyers in Calgary, Vancouver, Toronto. It's my great pleasure to meet with you today and get you to talk about some of these cases that the public really cares about. Now, I recently noticed through all of your press releases, I get about 1,000 press releases on COVID from the different provinces and the different cosmopolis and so on, and it's overwhelming to keep track of whether we're in phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, whether we can be with 5, 10, or have to wear a mask or not, or it's insane.
And it's hard to keep track of.
Yeah.
Or impossible.
Impossible. So, and the press release that I want to focus on, for a start, is the Ontario lockdown, and I'm asking you empirically, in Canada, is Ontario the one that's suffering the most under excessive lockdown of all the provinces?
They seem to be the worst, or one of the worst, in terms of lifting the lockdown. They're behind the other provinces. We've had schools reopen in BC and Quebec. In Alberta, we have mosques and synagogues and churches and restaurants are partially reopened. Gyms are still closed, unfortunately. It's a different situation in every province, but certainly Ontario has got one of the worst lockdown situations. I forgot to mention, here we are meeting on this auspicious day, Canada Day. Happy Canada Day.
Happy Canada Day. Yes. The other reason to be together is we can't go anywhere and celebrate because the government of Alberta, that is the government of Calgary, I don't know if it's all over Alberta, said you cannot go out and celebrate Canada Day in any way. But protests are all right. BLM protests are all right.
If we had a huge anti-racism protest without social distancing, then Premier Jason Kenney and Chief Medical Officer Dina Hinshaw would be just fine with that.
They'd be fine with that?
Well, when it actually did happen in Calgary, huge anti-racism protest, and even though we were previously told that social distancing is this life and death necessity to protect us from this supposedly terrible killer, and yet when the anti-racism rallies had no social distancing, neither the Premier nor the Chief Medical Officer stepped in to reprimand the people.
No ticketing.
And no ticketing that I'm aware of. Nobody got a ticket for taking part in anti-racism protest, yet people have been issued tickets for peaceful protest at the legislature, protesting the violation of their charter freedoms.
Right. The lockdowns have caused a lot of suffering. I love the evidence that you provide in the suffering, the outcome, the corollary effects of these lockdowns regarding health and the economy and so on. So tell me, under the Emergencies Act, what does that have to do with the Charter Freedoms?
Excellent question. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms is the supreme law of Canada. So any provincial legislation like the Public Health Act is subservient to the Charter, underneath the Charter. So if there's a conflict between the Charter and a piece of provincial legislation or federal legislation or a municipal bylaw, if there's any conflict between the Charter and a government law or government policy, government order, it's the Charter that is the supreme law. And so all of the legislation has to comply with the Charter. So the Public Health Act allows some lockdown measures, but they have to be temporary and they have to be narrowly tailored to deal with an emergency. And I think if anybody had gone to court in March to challenge temporary lockdown measures, they would have lost their court case. I think the courts would have said, well, look, we've got this scary disease. It looks really bad. A lot of people are saying that it doesn't threaten only elderly people who are already suffering from dementia and cancer and heart disease and health conditions, but it's a threat to the whole population. It looks really scary. So those measures would have been justified in March. But now we're in July, and now we know that COVID is not a threat to anybody under the age of 60 unless you have a immune compromised or serious underlying health condition. In which case, if you did, there'd be a whole bunch of things that you'd be threatened by, not just COVID. So we know that COVID is not an unusually deadly killer. We know from the death stats around the world that it is not this, it's Neil Ferguson with Imperial College in London when he predicted in March that there'd be 510,000 people in the United Kingdom would die of COVID and 2.2 million Americans would die of COVID.
Yep.
And this is what the governments went by. They listened to this guy, who, by the way, has a terrible track record in over-predicting, like off by thousands of percentage points. He was wrong on...
Is he the one who did the modeling as well?
I don't know what
that modeling was really bad.
The modeling in Alberta, April the 8th, Premier Kenney and Dina Hinshaw said as many as 32,000 Albertans could die of COVID. So things like that terrify the population.
Yeah.
Now we're in July, but we still have these lockdown measures when the stats, the hard data that is coming out from the Alberta government, the Ontario government, the Centre for Disease Control in the United States, the Italian government, the British government, the French government, the Swedish government, all the data that's coming out is showing that this is not this unusually deadly killer. And yet, I guess once the public got whipped up into a state of fear, a lot of people are still in that state of fear.
So if we work on their 14-day quarantine, because they're playing with the numbers constantly, right? Let's play with numbers. If we work on their 14-day quarantine and they now know the status quo is what you're saying, could we have a complete removal of lockdown, phase 4, phase 5, whatever, as of July 14th?
I think...
do we need 0 cases? You know, and even then, are those cases verifiable? Because everything's COVID now. You die of a heart attack, you've got COVID. So,
if you die of a heart attack and you happen to have had COVID in your system, they put you down as a COVID death. This has been admitted by public health authorities. They've publicly stated anybody that has COVID in their body at time of death is deemed to be a COVID death. So even the COVID death numbers are inflated and exaggerated. When you've got somebody in a hospice that is terminally ill with cancer or with something else, and they're in a hospice because that's the place you go to die.
Right.
You're not going to get better. You're going to get palliative care to alleviate your suffering, but they're not going to try to cure you. And even in a hospice, if you've got COVID in your body, everything's a COVID death. So the death stats are not reliable. I'm not saying that there haven't been a lot of people that have been killed by COVID, but the numbers can't be fully trusted. But the other important thing that's related is it's the historical global context. And it seems like society has kind of lost sight of the fact that people do die. And we've got 55 million deaths around
That's a
the
good
world.
thing, though. Who wants to think about death every day? Actually, they're reminding us of death every day. It's really...
we're at a point now.
We're not alive.
It's tragic. There's so many people are so scared. They're so scared of dying they've forgotten how to live.
Yeah.
But if you look at the historical context where there was the Asian flu. And the Hong Kong flu. The Asian flu was 1957-58, and the Hong Kong flu was 68-69. I might have the names mixed up, but those were the years. Yeah. In 57-58, a very vicious, very aggressive flu killed 1 million people worldwide, and this is when the world's population is less than half of what it is today. Okay, so that would be like 2 million people dying today.
Yeah.
And in 68-69, 11 years later, we get this other very vicious, aggressive flu with 1 million people being killed. Again, that would be like 2 million people dying today. You look at COVID deaths are a fraction of that.
I know.
So people are behaving as if, we don't die and we've never had a virus. And it's like, no, we've been fighting viruses for thousands of years. And it's a very sad fact of life that every year there are a lot of elderly people who are in very poor health already, and a virus comes around and they die. And it's
the numbers that you've mentioned to me, I mean, the numbers that are really important is which is the greater number. The toll from depression, from suicide, from isolation, from economic downturn, from unemployment, from businesses going bust. I mean, the bankruptcies. Cirque du Soleil just announced bankruptcy protection 2 days ago, I think it was. One of our wonderful Canadian institutions, right? And so you had said to me that governments need to do their homework and add up the cost of these lockdowns.
Absolutely.
To verify it against the Charter of Freedoms, to justify it under the Charter of Freedoms. You know, and if they're not justified under the Charter of Freedoms, to cease the lockdown altogether.
Well, absolutely. They're required by the Charter to fully weigh the costs and the harms of the lockdown against the benefits. And
have you seen those numbers anywhere?
Well, they're failing on both fronts. I mean, on the benefit side, the politicians say, oh, well, the lockdowns have saved thousands of lives, and there would have been way more COVID deaths.
How do they even know that?
I've asked the question, no answers thus far. Where is the specific evidence? I want to see the evidence that lockdown measures have actually saved lives. It's not good enough just to claim that. So they're failing on that front by thus far.
They're politicizing it, aren't they?
Well, it's very political because now they've imposed these lockdown measures which have killed a lot of people and harmed a lot of people. And now they want to justify it and look good and say, well, we've saved thousands of lives. Mm-hmm. I'm open to maybe the lockdowns did save lives, but I'd like to see this. What is that based on? You can't just make the claim. But worse yet, they're not so far making a serious effort, a sincere effort to calculate and discover and uncover all of the harms caused by the lockdown. And they're required by the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, when they violate our charter freedoms to move, travel, assemble, associate, worship, when they violate our charter freedoms, they have a legal obligation under the Constitution to fully explore and find out all of the harms. And only after doing all of that homework can you weigh it against the benefits, for which they also have not done their homework. And only then can you say, okay, well, yes, the lockdowns were justified or they were not justified. Mm-hmm. So they're failing on both sides. There's no specific persuasive evidence that lockdowns have saved lives. I'd like to see it. I'm open-minded, but I haven't seen the evidence. All I've heard is this mantra: the lockdowns save lives. The lockdowns save lives. Okay, tell me why.
In Alberta, Jason Kenney and the cabinet, I think it was 21 people or 27 people that met out of the government in Alberta. They rammed through in 48 hours Bill 10.
Yeah.
You've put a legal challenge against
Yes.
Bill 10.
We've taken them to court.
And you've got court approval for a real challenge to them, which is great. Now, I thought Bill 10 was really draconian, but then I looked at the Emergencies Act. I already thought it was too draconian. Bill 10, it takes it up to another level. Could it possibly be in Canada the most draconian removal of your freedoms and rights in Canada? Could it be one of the worst bills you've ever seen?
The worst pieces of legislation I've ever seen. I'm not aware of other provinces having a bill like Bill 10. What it did was it gave cabinet ministers new powers to write laws on the fly without any review by the elected members of the Legislative Assembly of Alberta. So Health Minister Tyler Shandro can wake up one morning and write new sections of law, and poof, they become the law that's on the books.
Do you know of any laws they've launched since the date of this? You wrote this press release March 31st, April 2nd that it was approved, right? It was stamped approved?
Correct, yeah. They rushed it through in 48 hours. They had only 21 elected MLAs in the Legislative Assembly when they passed it.